I want to talk about our focus just for a little bit tonight and how our focus needs to be on Jesus. We say that all the time, and I guess that's my job as a preacher is to say, keep your eyes on Jesus. And we as parents, we tell our kids, keep your eyes on Jesus. We want them to keep their thoughts and every action governed by what would Jesus do. And let me tell you something. If you do that, keeping your focus on Jesus and living for him, you're probably going to run into problems. I mean, look, if you have your Bible, I want you to open it. I want you to turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, chapter 11. And I want to read just a few verses from that passage. Paul is talking about his life and what being a Christian cost him. And here's what he said. From the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked, and you can put 4 to that because when he wrote this, there was yet another shipwreck that he hadn't yet gone through. A night and a day I have been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst and fastings often, in cold and nakedness, and besides the other things. What comes upon me daily, my concern, my deep concern for the churches, that's all because he was a Christian. He was living a relatively ordinary life, a normal life, was advancing in probably public favor in Jerusalem, but he became a Christian, and that's what it cost him. And I'm going to tell you, if you become a child of God, it's going to cost you as well. Jesus said so. Don't let it surprise you or throw you on your heels. Jesus said in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 12 that all who live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. It may not look like Paul's, but it's coming. So, I guess it's a fair question to ask, why would I ever want to do that? Why should I focus my life and my attention on Jesus if it's going to cost me so much? Can I give you some reasons tonight? The first reason that you need to have your life centered and focused on Jesus is because, number one, it's just the way you're supposed to live. You were made to do that. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13, as Solomon gets to the end of that book, and what he has tried to find out is, what is it that's good for a man to do all the days of his life? What am I supposed to do with myself? And Solomon had like unlimited resources to explore every avenue that you can imagine, and he did. And at the end of it, he says, well, here's what I learned. Fear God, keep his commandments. You know what? This is the whole of man. That's what Solomon concluded. God made us to live for him. It's our whole purpose in life. And when we get out of the purpose for which we're made, we have all kind of trouble. When I was a kid, I bought this. Well, my dad bought this really neat bike. It was a Huffy cheater slick. That meant that the back tire was slick like a drag racer car. It didn't have any tread in it. And the back fender kind of flared up a little bit. It was just really cool looking. And it had a banana seat. You know what I'm talking about? The older people know what I'm talking about. And then the handlebars came up like that, like a chopper. Oh, it was the coolest bike. And I was never so excited to get it, and we brought it home. And you could buy one that's already put together, or you could buy one in a box that you had to put together. The box version was $5 cheaper, so guess what we got? We got the bike in a box. And so we brought it and we dumped it all on the floor. And my dad, has these directions. And you know what direction? They go over the shoulder. You're not paying attention. And my dad's doing all the bolts and the nuts and all that kind of thing. And I'm sitting there watching. And then I saw those hand grips. I knew where the hand grips went. That's one thing I could contribute. So I popped those hand grips on my handlebars. But then we got to the point where you had to thread the handlebars through that little joint, and they wouldn't go because I didn't do it the way it was supposed to be done. And so my dad had to take a knife and cut my brand new handle grips off of my brand new bike. And I never got it. That's the way it was for my entire childhood. I had that really neat bike with one hand grip. But what the problem was is I decided to do it my way, and I wasn't following the directions. And that's what people are doing when they don't follow the teaching of Jesus and they don't have him as the focal point of their life. They're doing it their way, and it's not going to end well. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be prepared for judgment. And so, the number one reason, if you were to ask me, why should I go through persecution and hardship that eventually will come? Why should I do that? Well, number one, it's the way you were made. It's the purpose for which you were created. Stay within your purpose. But number two, I would suggest that you need to keep Jesus as the focal point in your life because of what he did for you. He died on the cross. I think that's one of the reasons that is compelling to me. The thought of a human being dying because of me, that's gripping. I know that there are many ways that we try to talk about this, but years ago, I lived right on the Ohio River, and we would go canoeing out to this little island out in the middle of the river called Babb's Island. And I was forbidden to do that. And so we would do a lot of fishing on the riverbank. And so I grabbed my fishing rod. One day, my friends came and said, "Hey, we got a canoe. Let's go." And so I grabbed my fishing rod. I told my parents I was going to go fishing. And when I got to the river, I dipped my rod in the water just long enough, my line in the water just long enough to be able to salve my conscience. I did go fishing, just like I told my parents I did. But off we went. And I entitled the article, "The Day I Caused Someone to Die." And we went out to that island, and we swang on a one of these ropes. We called them Tarzan ropes, and jumped in and out of the river and so forth. And then it came time to go home, and we climbed back in the canoe. And on my way home, everybody's expecting for me to say, the boat tipped over or something like that, and somebody died. That didn't happen. We got back to shore. But I lied to my parents. And because of things like that and many more of those things in my life, I caused Jesus to die. He died because he knew that I would make the mistakes that I've made and that you would make the mistakes that you have made. And I don't know if we fully grasp the impact of being responsible for another man's death. I know a man who got up to go to work one morning, and while he was getting ready, his 2-year-old son climbed out of the house, sat down behind his car, and he didn't know it. And he got in his car and he backed over, killing his own child. I don't even know how you process that. I I don't even like think about that because, it's disturbing to me. How do you move on knowing that you caused someone to die, an innocent person to die? Well, if that bothers you to hear that, then maybe you need to remember that someone just as innocent as that child died because of your sin and because of my sin. The cross of Jesus is one of the reasons why we need to give him our lives and focus our attention on him and make him the focal point, because he died for us. And it wasn't just a death, it was a death of humiliation, a death of great agony and humiliation. Paul said in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 8 that not only did he humble himself, but he humbled himself even to the death of a cross. We've romanticized the cross. You see pictures of a man, at least he has a loincloth on the pictures, but that's not typically the way it was done. They stripped you completely of your clothing. And you see them taking his clothing and casting lots for it at the foot of the cross. How humiliating would that have been? Sometimes rulers would defer and do something to not be so offensive to their culture where they are, but I don't know that the Romans would be interested in preserving that with the Jews. It was a humiliating death, and then it was an agonizing death. You've heard the stories, and I'm not going to go back through it, but scourgings and beatings and being punched in the face. And there's a statement that maybe gives you an indication of the gruesomeness of it. A prophecy that was made in Isaiah chapter 52 and verse 14. It said that the visage of Jesus was marred more than any man. Now, visage means appearance. Maybe that's the way your translations would say it. His appearance was really, really marred. Well, I, as a child, wonder why that is. Did they beat him so much that his face is all distorted? I know the soldiers hit him in the face and clubbed him with a reed, but I think it has to do more than just that. Those certainly contributed, but I read also in Isaiah 50 in verse 6, where Jesus prophesied how that he would give his back to those who would beat him, and that how he would give his beard to be plucked out by those who hated him. You take a guy that has a beard and you start pulling his hair. Do you think that they just carefully got hair, or do you think that that would also take some flesh? I can't imagine how bloody and disfigured Jesus might have looked in fulfillment of that prophecy. He endured all that because of us. I know you've probably heard this story before, but in World War II, there was the prisoner of war camp, Auschwitz, and they killed millions of Jews and soldiers there as well, and anybody that they considered undesirable. They were killing so many people that the ovens that they had couldn't even keep up with it, and they would just stack them like, firewood out to waiting to be burned. The commandant had a practice that if anyone tried to escape from any one of the cabins that they were in, that he would just call them all out, line them up, and just grab names at random and have them executed. Well, that happened. And there was a Polish soldier by the name of Francis Gajowniczek his name was called. And he fell down and pleaded for mercy because he said, I have a wife and children, please don't do this to me. And of course that fell on deaf ears We're talking about a guy that has killed millions of people, the commandant. And so another man in line stepped forward and said, "Sir, could I take that man's place?" His name was Francis Kolb. He was a Franciscan priest, and he said, "I have no wife, I have no children. Can I take the place of this man?" And for whatever reason, he allowed it to happen. And so the Polish soldier stepped back in line, and this Franciscan priest was called forward, and they ushered them off to a building and stripped them of their clothing and left them to the elements, and they eventually all died, except for him. He was the last one, and so to hasten his death, they injected poison in his heart, and then he died. But this Polish soldier was interviewed years later, and he said, "Come out back with me." And he took the reporter out back in his yard, and there was a tombstone in his backyard, and it was to that priest, Maximilian Kolb. And it said, "The man who died for me." And he was in tears as he was telling that story. And if you can understand that, then you can understand the gospel of Christ. For Jesus, who knew no sin, became sin or a sin offering for us that we might attain to the righteousness of God. I don't know what kind of obligation, indebtedness that you would feel for someone who died for you, but I know it would be great. And since Jesus died for us, 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 21, how can we not feel a sense of indebtedness to him? Let me give you a third reason. Why should you focus on Jesus? Well, it's because of the way you're made to live. It's the way we're supposed to function. It's also because of what he did for you on the cross. And it's also because of what he's doing for you. He's preparing for you a place in heaven. John tries to describe heaven to us. You get to the book of Revelation, and there are images, streets of gold. You have a crystal sea, and you have walls of jasper and gates made of, a giant pearl, and all this beauty and splendor. It's not literally those things, but what John was trying to do is I can't describe this place to you, so I'm going to take the most valuable things in this world and try to compare it to that. I once heard, it's just a fictional story about a man who the Lord visited one night and said, "Tomorrow I'm going to take you to heaven. You're going to die." And this man had been a hard worker, and he had earned a lot of money in his life. And he said, "Lord, I've worked so hard for this, and I've used it for your glory. Can I take it with me?" And he said, "Sure." So next thing you know, here's this man with 2 suitcases at the door of heaven. And they say, "Come on in, but you need to leave that there. You don't bring anything in." And he says, "Oh, no. God gave me special permission. I'm allowed." And he said, "Well, what is it that you have?" And he said, "Well, something that I worked for, that I value and treasured, and I worked really hard for it all my life." And he said that I could bring it in. He said, "Well, open it up and let me see it." And he opened it up, and it was 2 suitcases full of gold. And the man at the gate of heaven said, "You brought pavement?" As if, and I like that story because it illustrates the stuff that we value the most. That's just pavement in heaven. I mean, you can't imagine what this place is going to be like. And so I can't get my arms around it and my head around it. I know that it's somewhere I want to be. I know that it is described in terms that, well, it's a reward, Matthew chapter 5. I can't get it. I can't quite grasp it, but I know enough to know that's where I want to be. And you know what makes heaven even more appealing is the reunion part. of it. I don't know how everything is going to work. I remember David in 2 Samuel chapter 12, when he was told that his son died. He just got up and he washed himself and went into the house of God to worship. And they said, "How can you do this? Your son just died." And he said, "Well, I can't bring him back, but I can go to where he is." The longer you live, the more you have people in your life that have passed over into eternity, and you long to be with them. You don't have any more of those interactions that you once had. And to know that someday you can be reunited with people that you love more than life itself, that is an appealing thing to me. And I know that it is to you as well. But that's why I have my eyes focused on Jesus, because I want to be a part of that reunion with people that I love. And it's not just the immediate people that I love that I've known in this life. Have you considered what it would be like to be with all the saints of all the ages? It's a place I want to be. But I won't get there unless I keep my life focused on Jesus. And then one more point. Why should you focus your life on Jesus? Well, there's one more, and it's because of what Jesus will do to you if you don't. There's a place called hell. We don't like to acknowledge hell in our culture today. In fact, we make light of all hell is just a byword. It's just a joke. We make funny stories about hell. But hell is real, even though it's been diminished and all but ignored in our culture. The Bible tells us that hell is the wrath of God. We think of God as a loving God, and He is, but if that is all you think of with reference to God, then you're very short-sighted. God is loving, but He's also full of wrath upon those who would disregard the sacrifice that He made for our behalf. In Hebrews chapter 10, verses 29 through 31, he says, those who sinned under the law of Moses, well, they paid a price. They were punished. But then he said, of how much sorer punishment do you suppose those worthy who have trodden underfoot the sacrifice of the Son of God and have counted His blood as a common thing, and who have insulted the Spirit of His grace? You can't do that. God loved us so much that He allowed His Son to leave heaven and live among us and die for us. And if we know that and we say, yeah, well, one of these days I'll do something. One of these days, sure, I'll obey the gospel. Not now, but, I'll get my life right. And if you die, or if He comes back while you're disrespecting God's grace in that way, God is not coming back as a pitiful, merciful God who will show compassion to you. He's coming back as a God who is full of wrath that He will pour out on you because of your lack of appreciation for what He's done for you. The Bible tells us that hell is a place, well, again, these descriptions. How do you describe how bad hell is? Fire. That's what John used, fire. It's like fire. Have you ever been burned? Can you imagine being sustained in being burned? When we get burned, we jerk our hand away. We get away from it as soon as we can. I can't imagine something that would be comparable to fire, and you are immersed in it. Revelation chapter 20, we're cast into it forever. No relief, no timeouts. You don't get to catch your breath and then jump back in. It's forever. And you know what makes me sick? Literally. I have friends, close friends, who have died outside of Christ. And I know that this is their fate. I had a really close friend who died many years ago, and he died and was not a Christian. And as I speak right now, I know that he would give anything not to be where he is. And nothing that I can say can ever change it. His fate is sealed. He said no to Jesus in his life, and now there's nothing that I can say now. There's nothing I could say when he died, and there's nothing that I can say throughout all eternity that will ever change that. That is a sickening thought, to think that people that we love and know can die and experience that throughout all eternity. But that won't happen to me. I'm young. We got plenty of time. A few years ago, I was speaking at a youth rally in Louisville, Kentucky. We had to leave a little bit early. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning early. And I grabbed kids in my youth group at the time, and I said, hey, let's go on up there with me. And so I had a 15-passenger van. We had probably quite a few more people than that in that van, though we're not supposed to. But we got to the last light in town before we got out of town. And there's a kid in the back who said this, out of nowhere. He said, have you ever seen a dead person before? I'll never forget him saying that. Like he said, I don't mean like in a funeral home. I mean just like a dead person. And none of the other kids in first of all, I don't know why he said that. That's really weird, but that's what he said. But nobody else said they had. And they hadn't until about 15 seconds longer. Because as we left that traffic light, we came up and crossed the rise of a hill, and there was a wreck right in front of us. And there was a young girl. She was 18, we later learned. She was 18 years old. She was going to work at McDonald's. And she hit head on and flew through a windshield and was laying there dead on the road. Do you think she got up that morning and said a special goodbye to her parents? Because, I won't see you again. This is it. I guarantee you she didn't. She thought she had a long life ahead of her, but she died. It was cut off, and the end came for her that day. There are a host of people who have lived a long time here, and they can tell you similar stories, people that they know of that have died far too young. We have no hope of tomorrow, no guarantee of tomorrow. And so we need to make sure that we're not the object of God's wrath. And so why should we make Jesus the focal point of our life? I don't know anything beyond those 4 points really that is worth saying. I think that encapsulates the reasons in a way. I mean, you may come up with some lesser points, but if those don't move you, I don't know that any lesser points is going to move you. We were made to serve the Lord. That's one reason. Because Jesus died for us, because he's prepared a place in heaven for us, and because if we don't, our alternative is hell. Like I said, I don't have anything else to offer to motivate you. I think that's sufficient. And so what I want to end with is just simply a reminder of what Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 18 says. Come, let us reason together. I don't want you to be moved by emotion. I want you to reason. I want you to use your intellect and think about this. Let us reason together. Though your sins be as scarlet, they can be white as snow. And though they be red like crimson, they can be white like wool. And that's as true today as it was when Isaiah said it. You may be here tonight and you have sin in your life that you need to come clean with. Maybe you've not yet obeyed the gospel and you know you should. You know the truth and you know that's what Jesus commands, but you're waiting. You have some idea as to why you're waiting, but I'm just telling you, think about it. Reason with yourself. Use your intellect. Why would you leave here tonight lost when the offer of salvation is right here for the taking? We're going to sing a song of encouragement in a minute, and if your life is not where it needs to be, I encourage you to do what you need to do. If you need to be baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, do that tonight. We'll assist you in that. And if you're a child of God already, but you know you're not ready, you got things in your life, things going on that you know are things that you've just kind of turned your back on God to be able to pursue these things. Ask God to forgive you and change the way you're living. And we'll pray with you to that end tonight. If you're here tonight and you need to respond to this invitation, we invite you to come as we stand together and sing.